now begin. So thanks everyone for being here. I want to make sure, first of all, you can hear me and see me. So if a couple of you can just confirm that, I will know that I'm not just speaking into a void. Yes, Camilla says yes. Someone else, you can hear me and see me, both. And I'm assuming you can see my camera. You can't see my screen yet, although I'll be showing that to you shortly. Great, loud and clear. Excellent. So to get started, I want to do a few things today. So I'm going to tell you our agenda. I'm going to once we've gone over the agenda, I'm going to dive right into talking about what's of utmost importance to you guys, I'm sure, which is your assignment. So I'm going to review that. I'm going to answer any questions that you guys have about the assignment, which I'm going to give you a moment. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to ask those questions, pose those questions. Then once I've gone over the assignment, reviewed the details of the expectations, which are the expectations for that assignment, which is due at the end of next month. Then I will go over some tips and tricks and hints and guidelines on how to do a great job with that by creating something really, really great that you can deliver as part of the deliverable. I'm going to try to help you save time and produce a really excellent piece of work for your final project for this course. Once we've done that, I'm going to explore, as I mentioned, explore some of the 10 most important things that are going to change journalism. So entrepreneurial journalism, as we talked about in the first session, is not just about creating new projects. It's also about thinking about how journalism will change and how technology will change journalism and change the production of it, the distribution of it, the consumption of it, and the monetization of it. So there's a lot of ways in which technology and tools, and as well as other changes, can impact journalism. And we're going to talk about some of those examples. And I'm going to walk you through some slides that I put together that focus on some of the 10 most important new things that are going to change journalism. So that'll be in the latter part, the last half of the session today. And then I'll open up again for some questions and discussion, and we'll call it a day. So that's the plan in a nutshell. And throughout, I'm going to pause periodically to ask you guys to share your input. So I want this to be, again, an interactive session as always. I may call on a couple of you to add comments with your audio or even with your camera. But I'll also ask you to fill in a couple of polls. So let's do that right now. Let's start with the first one. So the first one is basically a chance for you to pose questions. And the way I want to do it is to use a poll that I've set up, and the link I'm going to put in the chat window right now. It's a familiar one if you remember from last time. It's just bit.ly, which is a URL shortener that you should all know, I'm sure, bit.ly/quick replies, because you're going to quickly reply. And in this case, you'll see when you open that, you just ask for your name. So you can just put in your name. You can use your first name. It doesn't matter. And then it's asking what your question is. So what's your question about the final assignment? There's 4 parts to it. There are things that you probably have never done before. And I want to make sure that by the time we finish today's session, everything is crystal clear to you. And it's still going to require a lot of work, obviously, but I want there to be no ambiguity or confusion about anything. So this is your opportunity to ask. You can ask about the deadline. You can ask about what's required. It's all written in black and white on the assignment and the syllabus, but I want to make sure that there's nothing that's unclear or terminology that you're confused about. I don't mind any silly questions, simple questions, complicated questions, whatever questions you have are totally fine. You can ask about the specific terms. So on the Lean Canvas, there are 10 specific sections of that part of the assignment, over 10 pages. So if there's any question you have about any of those terms, that's on page 5 of the syllabus. Or anything about the Kickstarter campaign that you guys are going to create, or the video you're going to create. I'm going to walk through that after we go through the questions briefly, but if there's anything specific that you're wondering about, now is the time to ask that. So again, the link is bit.ly/quick replies. And I see 2 questions are already posed. So I appreciate that from Judith and Damita. Let's see if we can get some of the other questions. So I'm assuming you have some sort of question. If you don't have any question, if you're crystal clear on everything, you can write, I'm crystal clear on everything, and I'm going to do a fantastic job on this. And that's fine too if you want to write that. But you should put in a question. So you want to take a minute and look back at the syllabus, let me put in the link again to the syllabus. I know you're all studying that very carefully, but just in case you haven't looked at it recently, which is fine, I'm going to put in the link to that, remind you of that. So here's the link to the syllabus again, just so it's nice and fresh at hand. So yeah, Danielle, if you don't mind, just use the use that form that I put in there, because I'm going to ask you other questions as we go on that same link. So I just want to get used to using that, and that way I can also collect those and keep track of any questions that we haven't replied, haven't responded to through that form. So you can just post that. Go to bit.ly/quick replies, and you can post your question in the form. I'll give you another 30 seconds, 60 seconds. And meanwhile, I will, while you're asking your questions, additional questions, I will start answering a couple of them that have come in. So I'll go in order of the ones that I see. Tips for the Kickstarter video. Yeah, so I'm actually going to walk you through a couple of examples of Kickstarter projects from other students. And I'll mention a few things along the way there. But just to answer the question right now, the main thing is to have a clear sense of what you're going to communicate, what your goal of in terms of what you're communicating, and to have a clear sense of what the user is likely to be interested in. So remember that when someone is watching a video of yours, they don't really care about you necessarily, right? Your friends and family may, but in general, the average person doesn't care about you. What they care about is what's in it for me, or why should I care about this? So you have to make a strong case to them about the importance of what you're doing. And you have to explain to them why it's useful, how it's useful, why it's important, why it's worth supporting. And then you have to communicate what you're actually going to do. So if you're going to make something, you should say how you're going to make it. If you're going to provide a service, you should explain how the service works. So it should be a very functional thing that communicates in a way that reaches the person who's watching. It shouldn't be about your interests or why you like to do something, because no one cares about that. What they care is about what's in it for them and why it's useful and why it's important and why they should care. So that's on a high level. In terms of the specifics of the Kickstarter video, if you have a smartphone, somebody asks, how should we film the video? Is a cell phone video okay? The technology part isn't super important. If you have a current generation smartphone and you have a well-lit room, or if you're shooting outside where there's light, and you're using a tripod, or you're stabilizing the video, that's going to be fine. The main thing is you want to make sure the audio is clear. You don't want it to be something where it's distant or hard to hear. So you should be close to the cell phone if you're using a cell phone so that the audio is very clear. You should be clear about what the message is, and you should have practiced saying that message so that you're not stumbling through. I had a student at one point, not among you guys, in a different group, who they just decided to sort of record it off the cuff, and they just rambled on for 3.5, 4.5, 5.5 minutes, and no one would ever watch that, and it wouldn't be compelling, and it wouldn't be convincing or persuasive. So you want to hone your message, edit your message, and practice your message. Film it. If you're using a cell phone camera, you should be close to the camera so the audio is clear. Ideally, if you can, and it really, I've taught third graders to use iMovie and very simple video editing software. So you should be able to, with an hour or 2 hours of work, you should be able to put together a simple video with your own voice, plus some images of whatever it is you're doing. It's pretty easy to do. There's lots of free tutorials about iMovie or other free video editing tools. If people are wondering about where to find those, if you Google and you can't find them, I'm happy to provide you some specific links, but it should be fairly straightforward to do. As I said, I've taught elementary school students to create simple videos, and they can do it very well, and I know you guys can do that as well. Let me get to a couple of the other questions. If a project takes off, what's your percentage? Are you talking about my percentage? I'm guessing not, but my percentage is 0. This is your intellectual property and your team's. I'm not sure. I guess that was a joke, but in any case, I have no stake in any of this. I make no money from any of my students. How is a Kickstarter draft supposed to look like? Great question. I will show you examples so you'll see what that looks like. Basically, it's making a case with some text explaining what you're going to do and why it's useful for people, and also including some images, because every Kickstarter page has to have some nice images. Are there any rules or guidelines concerning the video? Can you do it in whatever way you want to? Yes, you can really do it in whatever way you want to, as long as you're thinking with the user in mind. So think about what the average user or what the person you're expecting will watch this. Think about serving them. Do something that they will appreciate, they will understand, they will value. Don't do something just because you think it's funny or you want to tell your own story about yourself, unless it's going to be interesting and compelling to someone else. And one way to do that is to test and to show other people, and especially people who you don't know. And especially people who are able to give you objective feedback and tell you something is terrible if it's terrible, because a lot of people will just be polite and say it's wonderful, no matter what. A couple other questions here. Explain. So yeah, more questions about Kickstarter. So I'll walk you through that step by step. Criteria for a pass and criteria for an A. Let me actually go back to what we say on page 6 of the syllabus to answer that question. The first criteria is, how effectively does the assignment submission develop an idea for product or service that addresses a market need in a thoughtful way? And how well does it address the 9 components of Lean Canvas, including the potential for sustainable revenue generation? So basically what that means is, how effectively does the idea communicate that you're communicating seem like a product that actually has a clear value to some group of people? How effectively does it show that you've thought about a particular group, a particular audience? So it's not a website for the entire world, or an app or a newsletter for the entire world, because that never works. It's for a very specific community, and you've thought about what that community of people is, who they are specifically, and what they need and why they need it, how your product or service works. So basically the 9 components of Lean Canvas, which we'll walk through in a few minutes again as well. So that's the first part, is how effective does your submission, how effective does your product or service seem based on your submission, the first part of the submission, which is Lean Canvas. How efficiently and effectively does the Kickstarter campaign work? So that's the second part of the evaluation. Did you participate in the online course, the webinars, etc., online discussions? That's a third set of criteria. And that's more sort of for the course overall. That's less for the assignment submission in particular. But if we go back to the assignment submission itself, the video is really part of the Kickstarter project. And then the other part of the assignment, part A, is the Lean Canvas and the 10-page PDF that explains basically all about your product or service. It explains what the value proposition is. It explains who you're reaching, the customer segments. It explains what problem you're solving, or a series of problems for this group, how the solution works, how you're going to actually distribute it to people. So are they going to find this on, is it going to be delivered to their email box? Are they going to find it at local stores? Are they going to, is it a printed thing that's going to be distributed to 20 schools around the city? Like, what's the channel of distribution, and how does that work, and why did you choose that? The revenue streams and the cost structure. You don't have to get into minute detail about every little cost. You just have to think about the primary costs and have a general sense of that. And also think a lot about the revenue approach. How will this actually make money? Cost structure. And we're going to take a couple of your projects as an example and walk through them in a little bit. We'll walk through the Lean Canvas, so you get a second chance to delve into this a little bit. Key metrics. So how are you going to measure if you're making progress? It's not typically about vanity metrics like page views, because usually with small products and services, it's a very small group at first. So you have to think about other kinds of metrics that you might use. What's your distinction? How are you going to do this effectively in a different way than what other people have done? So those are the main things that you're going to communicate in your PDF. And then you should also include how you're going to get started. So what are the next steps? What are the very next steps that you're going to take to make this happen? I think we've gotten through most of these questions. Let me just see if there's any. The project we're thinking about. So there's one question about whether it can be in German. So I think, if you want to do something that has a German component and an English component, that's totally fine. That might be a good idea. I do want to be able to read it and understand it, and watch it and understand it. So there should be an English component, but it makes sense to me that you'd want to do it in both languages, and that's totally fine as well. So I'll leave that up to you. Another thing you can do is you can do an English version and have German subtitles, or you can even have a German version and have English subtitles, as long as it's very clear and easy to follow, and you make sure that the video moves at a pace that can be, where the subtitles can be read, etc. And if you're not sure, you can run it by me in advance. If you want to make sure that I can understand it and it makes sense, looks right. I'm happy to take an early look at things to the extent I can within reason. Although if it's the night before it's due, I may not be able to do that in time for you to get my feedback in time. If somebody else wants to make the video in an animated way, I think that's fine. If you have the capability of doing that, I think that's fine. Again, make sure that it makes sense for your users. Think about your users, and do something because it makes the most sense to work effectively for the people, the intended audience. Okay, I think so. That's answers to those questions. I'll leave that open for a bit in case other things come up as we go along, and you have other questions. So now we're moving on to the next part, which is we've already started talking about the assignment, but I'm just going to repeat again the overview of what we're doing. You're submitting something with 4 parts to it by December 30th, and you're in groups of 3 or 4 students. And you're submitting it online through the course path, in which most of you have already gotten well along the way with, and that link is in the syllabus as well. You are developing an idea for a product or service. As you know, you are going to use the Lean Canvas to model that. We're going to walk through the Lean Canvas. I'm going to ask for a couple of volunteers in a moment. So if you want to volunteer, I will actually walk through with you what that Lean Canvas might be looking like, which hopefully will be helpful to those of you who volunteer for that exercise in a minute. And then you are, in addition to the Canvas itself, which is an overview document, you have a 10-page PDF, which essentially walks through the 9 elements of the Canvas in a little bit more detail. Because on the Canvas, you have obviously a very small space, so you can only have a couple of bullet points in each section. Then the 10-page PDF basically goes through in a little bit more detail each of the 9 components of the Lean Canvas. And you can use examples, you can use details, you can use images, anything that helps convey how the product works, why it's useful, why it's needed, who's going to use it. You can talk about how you've already tested certain things. If you've done certain tests or tried certain things, you can talk about other products and what lessons you've learned from other products and services in the marketplace. From conversations and interviews you've done with your user base or a couple of sample users. That's always very good material. It's much better when you get material from the real world as opposed to just dreaming it up from your brain. So if you have stats that show that there are 27,000 blind people in Vienna, and you spoke with 10 of them and they describe that they like listening to the radio for news, but that there's no show about whatever business news in Austria or something. And if you have real people saying real things or real data, that's obviously going to be more persuasive than if you just say, I'd love to write about music and I want to create a blog about music. And that's interesting maybe, but it's subjective. And so there's not necessarily data unless you bring data about that and show why this specific idea for this specific audience in this specific time makes sense. The short video is essentially, it's a pitch for the startup, summarizing what problem it solves, who it benefits, how it generates revenue, what obstacles you may face and how you're going to confront those challenges, and what the next steps are. Generally, it should be between 60 and 120 seconds. If you have a terrific video and it's very effective and it happens to be a little bit longer than that, it's 2.5 minutes instead of 2 minutes, not the end of the world, it's okay. But it should not be 7 minutes of someone droning on in a boring way. So it should be effective and clear and concise, because people won't watch it if it's not. And this is intended to be something that people could actually watch and respond to. if you actually, and then, by the way, it should be hosted, right? So I think that's obvious, but it should be on a video service, typically Dropbox, Google Drive, or YouTube, Vimeo, etc. But don't make it private. Almost every single time there's one person who has a private video, it's marked private, and so it can't be viewed. And so it's not useful to anyone. So don't make that mistake. It doesn't have to be public. It can be unlisted, right? If you're using YouTube, you can make it unlisted so no one can find it unless they have the specific link, and that's fine. But it should not be private, because if it's private and I can't see it, then I can't evaluate it. No one else can either. The Kickstarter draft is very simple. It also doesn't have to be published. So if you're concerned about it not being ready or something like that, or you don't want to make it public, you don't have to, but you have to make it a draft. And when you make a draft, you'll see that there's a link you can get that you can use to get feedback on your draft. And that's what you'll be creating. If you publish it, I'll give you extra credit. If you actually begin the campaign, that's awesome. That's great. And you'll get extra credit for that. But I'm not assuming that everyone's going to do that. And so you can you can include the link to the draft. And basically you'll see, we can walk through that. It basically asks you for a brief description, a summary of what you're doing, a longer description of what you're doing, a video, and potentially some images, ideally for the description page, and then prizes. So the way Kickstarter works is people do things they support not just as a donation, but they actually get what Kickstarter calls rewards. So rewards could be something like a thank you email. It could be something like being mentioned on a website. We'll mention all our backers on our website somewhere. It could be that you send a postcard to people. It could be that you give them a PDF, a guide to something. So again, if this were the project for blind, if you were creating a new audio podcast about business news for whatever, blind people in Vienna, maybe you give them a special 2-minute recording of something, right? Or maybe if it's for a different audience, maybe if it's about something, I don't know, about some sport, NHL. I had former students who were interested in NHL in Austria, or hockey in Austria, and maybe they could create something like a PDF with it could be a sort of a mini article about something that everyone gets. It could be a list of the most useful resources on a particular topic. So it could be depending on what you're doing, can be any number of things. In fact, what we'll see some examples of those rewards pages in a minute. I'll walk you through some of those. And that's basically what the Kickstarter consists of. It's a fairly simple thing. And once you've done the lean canvas and you've walked through, you've thought about the value you're creating, you're simply translating that to an average user. So the average user doesn't care about the canvas. They care about what's in it for them and the value proposition, what you're offering, and why it's useful, or why it's necessary, and how it's cool, and how it's new. And so that's what you try to convey with the Kickstarter. And Kickstarter has a ton of great materials, some of which I can share with you. And why don't we start with that? So we actually had a guest from Kickstarter come to class a couple weeks ago, and she created this PDF, which I'll share with you guys. In fact, I think I can I just drop a file right into here? I think I can just drop this file right in here. So that you can look at it while we discuss this. Let me see if this will let me drop a file right here. Let me try it one more time. If I can't, I will post it I'll post a link to the doc in the syllabus or online. Okay, yeah, you should see that file now. It's called Getting Started for Journalism Students. Can someone just confirm that you have that? You can click on it and download it. And I will also put this as a resource in the online course path, along with a couple of other Kickstarter resources. So you'll see those added to the online course path. And yes, it looks like Alyssa, Judith, Alexander got it. So, So if you look at this, it has actually a couple of useful links, which will take you to a lot of resources about effective Kickstarter projects. There's a huge amount of help available on Kickstarter and a ton of great resources. And as I said, I'll give you a couple of other Kickstarter resources as well that I'll drop into the course path. And you can look at that on your own time as well. I won't walk through that detail by detail. But there's a ton of really good Kickstarter resources. So what I want to show you next is a couple examples of Kickstarter projects. I want to share my screen so that you will be able to see some of this. I'm not sure if the video will play properly, so we'll test that out and see how that works. But we'll give it a try. And let's see. So I want to here. Okay, so yeah, so I'm going to walk you through a bunch of different examples of Kickstarter projects. Some of them, these are from another class that just ran that a friend of mine teaches, and they're not necessarily all doing journalism, but it'll just give you a sense of different kinds of videos and Kickstarter projects that they produce. So let's see if I can now share this. Now I want to, not sure what you're seeing. Are you seeing the North Korea Borderlands project? There we go. Here we go. Okay, now you should be seeing this project. Okay, do you guys see that North Korea project right now? Yes, okay. So this is an example of a project from a couple years ago, and this was successful, 462 backers. I want to just play a bit of the video just because a couple of people had questions about the video. I'm not totally sure if that's going to come through. If it doesn't, you can look at it on your own. I'll share the link.
Working along the Chinese-North Korea border in 2013, I saw firsthand how divergent the on-the-ground realities were from what I was seeing on the news at the time. With my visit following reports of a border crackdown and some of the worst inter-Korean tensions in decades, the nuance of what is actually a very porous border and lives of thousands of ordinary North Koreans.
Are you guys seeing this video?
Stood out vividly.
Can you hear the audio as well?
Standing on an abandoned bridge just feet away, more or less, from unprotected North Korean territory, I felt millions of miles from the increasingly sensational Google News feeds, which continue to shape the majority of what people think they know about North Korea today. And though I was only there for a week, I realized that, like in other places where North Koreans can be found in significant numbers, there were hundreds of stories just waiting to be uncovered along the Chinese-North Korean border. Stories that might seriously influence the way we think about the country today. While we try to uncover as much unique material as we can about North Korea every day at NK News, working with resources generated primarily through a modest subscription system, there are real limitations on the amount of on-the-ground reporting we're able to do in places like the border. That's why today at Byline we're asking for your help.
Okay, so that's Chad. He's the founder. That's our library at the school here. And he just sat down. He actually had a couple cameras he set up on tripods. Pretty straightforward setup. He happened to have a DSLR, so it looks nice. But that could be a new iPhone or a new Samsung or whatever. It probably would be fine. And he had thought about what he's going to write. And he dropped in a couple of images, right? He showed a couple of brief photos that just add to the explanation of what he's talking about. So not super complicated. This doesn't require, fancy cinematography or anything, but it does require thinking about your message, being clear about it, using a couple of supplementary images, not being too, sometimes people get really silly with this kind of stuff. And in my experience, that's not usually particularly effective unless you're doing something that's a comedic kind of project or something that's supposed to be really humorous. I wouldn't try to get too playful with it. I would try to be serious with it for the most part. Again, unless you have a specific reason and a very compelling reason to do so. So if somebody asked, it's not a stupid question at all. It's a good question. Alexander asked, if you get more than your goal, what happens to it? So you get as much as you raise. So if you raise more, you get more, and you presumably use it towards your project, but you can raise as much as you can raise. Only about 20% of journals and projects succeed. I think I've mentioned that stat. I may have mentioned the stat. And that's not a secret stat, by the way. If you go to the homepage of Kickstarter, you go to the bottom, you can look at stats, and you can open up the section to see each particular category, and you can look at the journals and ones, and that's about the success rate. So a lot of projects don't make their goal, and if they don't make your goal, you don't get anything. And that's the idea, is that, yeah, that's exactly what Sarah's asking. If you don't get your goal, you don't get anything. And the reason is that, well, you might guess this, but if you don't have enough money, you may not be able to do the project. So let's say your ambition was to do this North Korea Borderlands reporting, and you got $500, and you needed, a couple $1,000s for the plane tickets and whatever else. You couldn't necessarily execute the project. So the idea is that you pick an amount below which you probably might not be able to do it. And then here, if you look at the pledges, this is something else I want to point your attention to. So on the right-hand side of this page, there's different pledge levels. So if you pledge 25 or more, he's going to send you a coffee cup. If you pledge 35 or more, he's going to send you a T-shirt. If you spend 60 or more, he's going to send you a T-shirt and a coffee cup. If you spend 99, if you pledge 99 or more, he's going to send you a T-shirt. He's also going to give you a couple of T-shirts, I guess. And then if you spend 150 more, you get a subscription to the site as well. You also can participate in this Google Hangout series, so you can discuss the ideas or topics that you have in mind. And then 250 or more, you get a digital print. So you get the idea. There's a lot of different kinds of things you can offer. 500 or more, you can get an invite to a special dinner event. 1,000 or more, you get a print and a dinner event, and blah, 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 right? So it goes on and on. In my opinion, I strongly encourage you to have rewards that aren't physical, or if they are physical, they're very, very simple things like stickers or postcards or something like that. Because if you have coffee cups and you're mailing them, or T-shirts, it starts to be a hassle to manage that process. You can, of course, use websites, Zazzle or whatever, dozens of other websites that print T-shirts for you or print coffee cups, etc. But it's just another thing to think about. So if you do it, just think about think about how you're going to manage that. If you have someone who can help you manage it, or if it's a small scale project and you have 20 supporters or 40 supporters, it may not be that big a deal. But if you start to have hundreds of supporters, then it becomes more of a process to manage sending out T-shirts. And whereas if it's just digital stuff, people can just download it. You can send them a link and they can download a digital file, a PDF, or a mention on their website, or whatever. That kind of digital stuff is a little bit easier. Or if you invite them to participate in a Google Hangout or something like that, you don't have to handle physical goods. So that's just a tip about rewards. You'll see here also, in addition to the video, there's a description. So if you go down this page, you'll see here's a description of what they're trying to do, how they're going to do it, some images. Here's an example of an ebook that you can download if you donate, which is actually pretty cool, what life is like inside North Korea. And there's images so you can see what the stuff looks like. People like to see images. In this case, they're images of the rewards, but it could also be images of something else that's relevant to your project. So you should not have a text-only page. You should always have images, and ideally high-quality images. If you're looking for images and you don't want to create or can't create your own images, one resource to be aware of is called Unsplash, which you may or may not know about. It's free resource, Creative Commons images. In fact, the site specifies that you can use the image, you can download and use the images in whatever way you want for any reason. You do not have to pay. There's no licensing fees or anything like that. It's considered polite and professionally appropriate to give the credit, but you don't have to pay for it, and you don't have to ask permission. So Unsplash is a great, and it's not sort of clip art kind of quality. It's actually high quality professional photography, and you can search by keyword and find photographs of virtually anything you can imagine in the world. It's a pretty amazing resource. So that can be helpful when you're designing your page. Or when you're looking for images for your video, making sure that it obviously is relevant and makes sense and fits in with your message and what you're communicating. Okay, a couple other Kickstarter projects. These are sort of a few from different, this is from another class a friend of mine teaches, and some of these are not journalistic, but you get the feel for what they're doing. He actually requires, I'll show you the syllabus. So in his course, he actually requires that students aim to raise $1,000 and get 50 backers. So I'm not nearly as strict as that. That's a challenging thing, especially if people haven't ever done it before. And so these are all the links. Actually, I'll paste this link in here in case you want. This is from the School of Visual Arts. They have a series of cool programs here in New York City. And you can look at their projects if you're interested. Again, they're not all journalism related. Some of them are kind of media. Some of them aren't at all. And some of them made their target and some of them didn't, right? So this one did reach its goal. And you can watch the videos and see what you think about them. This is a project to give women of color, actually young women of color, tools for community engagement. And you can see what they created and how they describe it. You can see images of the product. You can see what's in it for you kind of messaging, speaking to people who are using this and how they're going to benefit. So you can use these as inspiration if you'd like. Here's another one. Let me see if there's one I particularly want to show you. This is kind of an interesting travel journal someone has created. Lots of different projects. A VR project. It's a utility dog leash, kind of a curious project. So lots of different kinds of things. And many of these made it past the $1,000 mark. So you can see how they did that. And let's see if there's one other one I wanted to show you. Yeah, here's another one from a student who just put up her project. And this is actually about changing journalism schools. And she's pitching this towards journalism school professors from around the world, which is kind of interesting. And she has several different rewards: a handwritten note, a magnet, a diversity FAQ, so an infographic that people can use within their school to communicate information, a kind of poster, digital poster, a one-page PDF with tips and tricks, a private session, brainstorming session, for those who offer to contribute more than $100. So you get the idea of what some of those rewards look like. Let me pause and see if there are any questions about Kickstarter specifically before we move on to something else. Okay. Actually, I wanted to show you one more. So if you go to Narratively Kickstarter, I think I've talked about Narratively a couple different times. But this is a really good example, and I'll paste the link in. This is what their Kickstarter project looked like. They've grown this into, Noah was my student in 2012, so it's now already 5 years ago. And he's grown this into a product with 500,000 unique page views every month. 500,000 unique visitors every month. And a significant amount of revenue every year, and a bunch of employees and all that. So it's a successful product. They've won a bunch of awards. They raised $53,000 on this. So they were really ambitious, and they had 800 people. And they did that with a team of, a kind of core team of 5, but they also had a lot of supporters who were interested in participating. And
New York City should not exist.
The message is, this is a little bit longer than the ones I suggested for you to do. This is 3.5 minutes.
Yet somehow, the city just works beautifully. 8 million stories, walking and
it's carefully scripted,
together.
And it's explaining why he wants to create this product.
We're Narratively, and we don't care about the breaking news or the next big headline. Narratively is devoted exclusively to uncovering New York's untold stories. The vivid human interest stories, the rich, in-depth narratives that get at the heart of what this city is all about. These are the stories that fall through the cracks in this city that supposedly never sleeps. Narratively slows it down. Each week, we'll explore a different theme about New York and publish a series of connected stories, just one a day, told the most appropriate medium for each piece.
You might have a long-form article on Monday, followed by a short film on Tuesday, then a photo essay, an animated documentary, or an audio piece.
I was born in Queensville and have lived here.
Our contributors know this city like no one else. We've canvassed its corners and met its characters while reporting for top outlets like the New York Times, New York Magazine, CNN, NPR, and the New Yorker, to name a few. We can't wait to share the stories we're producing for Narrative.
I encountered...
Okay. So this, by the way, is a project that I wouldn't normally advocate for people because it is kind of a general interest product. And those are really, really hard, especially in a market where there's a lot of other publications already around. So they had the good fortune of having a really powerful team of contributors and a really good quality product that they were very effective at marketing to people and getting people to try it and to share it. And they got a lot of outlets to publish their syndicated stories, which helped people discover narratively in the beginning. So normally it's much easier if you're targeting a specific niche, as we've talked about. But in some cases, broader projects can succeed as well. Okay, so that's a bit about Kickstarter, which is one of the parts of your assignment. And actually, if we go back to this page, you see here Kickstarter Project. And the nice thing about this platform is that it walks you through all of these kinds of questions, and it does a really good job of helping you step by step. And then when you start a project, it kind of walks you through. So pick a category. So let's pick journalism. Give the product a title. So let's say this is the Vienna. Someone give me a focus for this, just so I can sort of walk you through what this process is like. Somebody, or actually, why don't we even have you somebody turn on your audio and just walk me through something you're thinking about, and we'll just take a first couple steps in this just for a couple minutes. So who's willing to volunteer and walk through this with me? In exchange for being bold, you'll get a little bit of help on your specific product. So I'd encourage you to volunteer. I hear someone's voice. Who is it?
Yeah, it's me, Alexander. I have an idea.
Great.
But not for the project for our university, but for me in private.
Okay, that's fine. So let's since we're just using it for the example, it doesn't really matter. So what are we going to title this? I'm not going to go through obviously and publish this. We're just going to walk through the
Well, I would name it Europe Till I'm 40.
Okay.
Because I had an idea about a travel blog by seeing every capital of Europe until I'm 40.
By the time you're 40, you mean?
Yes, that's in 5 years.
Okay.
Europe Till I'm 40 was
yeah.
Until I'm 40.
I think that's a mistranslation. Until means I'm going to do something until we finish, right? I'm going to keep talking until the time is over. I don't think that's exactly what you mean. You mean before you finish, right? Before you're 40, right?
Yeah, by 40.
Yeah.
Like the meter says here on the right on the chat.
Good.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I can put Austria given that I'm here, but let's just try it and see if it stops me.
Well, now I'm telling everybody my idea.
I think that's okay. It's all about the execution, not about the idea. Okay, so now we choose an image, right? So I'm not going to actually choose one for now, but that's a simple thing to do, right? It's 16 by 9. So you want an image that's horizontal, not a vertical image typically. And that's going to be the top sort of banner image, right? By the way, a quick tip on this. This is an amazing resource. I'm sure I've mentioned it before, but if I haven't, canva.com. Have you guys used this resource? Have you used this, Alexander?
Yes, we had I had a seminar what for English for the Canvas model.
No, I'm talking about canva.com.
No, I don't know that.
Okay, so Canva is I'm going to switch windows for a second. It's basically a tool for creating graphics. And you do not have to be a designer. You do not have to know anything about design. These are examples of things that I've created just using simple templates. and you just pick a template and then you customize it. And they have banners for all different kinds of specific platforms. So if you're creating a Facebook post, a Pinterest graphic, a Twitter post, a Tumblr graphic, Instagram, whatever it is you're creating, you can use the templates. And if you pick any one of these, let's say you're creating a Facebook cover or something like that, which is similar to the Kickstarter cover. Once you go in here, you guys can still see the screen, right?
No, it's white.
Okay, let me switch it then. So let's switch windows. Good thing I asked. Okay, so now we're switching. Now do you see this?
No, it's still white. Oh, no. Okay, now I see it, yeah.
Okay, so let me go back for a second. So, so these are designs. These are some designs I've worked on in the past. You can see different kinds of shapes, different kinds of sizes, different kinds of topics, including the video covers, right? From the videos you've watched, you'll see the video covers that I put through here. And if we create a new design, you go to the templates page and you say what kind of design you're going to do. So let's say I'm going to do a Facebook cover, which is similar to a Kickstarter cover. It gives you a bunch of, I don't know how many different template options there are, dozens, and you pick whichever one you like as a look, and then you can replace the photograph, and you can obviously update the text, and and you just download it. So like within 5 minutes, you can have really nice designs for use on any page online or any graphic that you need for social media or for any report that you're producing, for anything really. It could be a flyer for something. You can create pretty much anything, and almost all of it is free. The only time you have to pay is when there's a dollar sign. So some of these have a $1 fee, but a lot of the free ones are fine. You can use images that you pull from here, or you can use your own images. You can add text elements using existing text blocks that they give you and just change the words. You can use other kinds of elements, free charts, free photos, all kinds of other stuff. And it's just drag and drop. You don't have to learn anything. You don't have to download anything. And it's free. Yeah, it's totally free. The only thing you pay for, as I said, is if you want to use some of the premium themes. So if you want this specific theme, it might be $1. Yeah, see, one image times $1, so it's $1 to use that. But in many cases, I don't find the need to use those because there's so many free options that are great, and you can customize them anyway. So very, very easy, and then you just download it. So so I'd recommend using that for your Kickstarter design and for any other things you're working on. You can even use it within a video, right? So you can create graphics that you put into your video, and that's a nice way of adding some graphic elements to what you're producing. So let me back up. We were looking at the Kickstarter draft page. I'm going to make sure that you can see what I'm doing. So I may have to switch windows here. Yeah, so I'm going to switch back to the Kickstarter window. Now, do you see the Kickstarter window again?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we have the title, project title. We have a short blurb. So what's a short blurb for this?
Well, I would say traveling to Europe and seeing every capital until I'm 40. I don't know. Maybe that's it. Okay.
So when you say traveling, you're talking about something you're going to do, right?
Yes, I would like to do that and have an interactive thing with the users, so they can donate money, they can put some things that I have to do in this city, and I don't know, go to a restaurant, go to a graveyard, to a special thing, and make a photo for them, visit a friend, visit somebody, I don't know, so that you can do stuff they want me to do. Yeah.
Okay, so I just rephrased that slightly, and obviously we're not going to go through this whole thing, so you can take it or leave it when you pursue this on your own. But the point I want to make here is that people don't care what you want to do, right? So just always keep that in mind. They want to know what's going to be interesting or useful to them. So that's why I rephrased as let's travel together virtually through Europe and see every capital by the time. Let's see, and I don't even know if you need to put that in the short blurb. You could say within the next 3 years or within the next 5 years or something. If it's 5 years, it might seem too far away. But anyway, the point is that when people see this, they see what's in it for them, right? If you say, I want to travel to every capital, that's great for you. Like, I'm not, why should I care, right? People don't, people don't, this isn't the same thing as there's some platforms where you can have people fund you through college or something like that, or I want to hike, through whatever, Africa, and people will give you money as sort of a donation to you personally. Kickstarter, it tends to be more that they either support the cause or that they have something in it for themselves that they're interested in.
Okay.
And hopefully there's a benefit to you and to people, right? That's why,
Well,
that's
I just made it up a couple of days ago, and I
that's fine. That's fine.
Be quiet here, so I came up with the idea. So
that's fine. That's great. I appreciate it. I'm not. This is not a criticism. I'm just sharing input. So you put in a subcategory if you want to. So if you're doing audio journalism or photojournalism, you can. You don't have to. That's just if people are looking for audio specific projects to support, etc. You can put in location. You can put in how many days. So typically 30 days is the optimal time. You can do 60 days, but it's harder to generate momentum. People will just see it and they'll say, oh, I'll come back some other time. It doesn't feel as urgent. So typically you want to do 30 days. You could do 15 days.
So until then, it should be completed from the donation.
Yeah, basically it's like a ticking clock. So people have to support the project within the number of days you set. Okay. And the advantage of that is it gives it a sense of urgency, right? It means that they have to do it now or they have to do it soon, and that they have to spread the word like kind of quickly. So it allows you to focus your marketing. Like if you had to sustain this for a whole 6 months, it would be impossible. You'd have to constantly be emailing people and it's just too hard to sustain. So 30 days, you can plan a marketing plan where each day you're going to do something, or you're going to partner with certain bloggers or certain social media influencers to spread the word. For our purposes of our assignment, I'm not as interested with the execution of the campaign. I'm just mentioning this because if you do want to run a campaign, you should know these things. For our purposes, how you actually execute the Kickstarter campaign is not so important. It's mainly just that you're explaining what the product and service is. And then your funding goal. So, you might aim for $500 or 500 euros, or you might aim for 1,000 euros, whatever. You can add teammates so that they can access your project. You can then add your rewards. So we've done the basic page, right? Now we go to the rewards. We can save these changes. Projects must be honest and clearly presented. Now we can choose the rewards. So we say what the description is, what the title is, what the pledge amount is. So let's say I say anyone who pledges €5 or more gets a, gets a thank you email or something.
Okay.
And you can say, I'll only do 10 of those or whatever. People typically create limits when they have physical products because they can't set, they only have 10 special magnets to send or something. You can add multiple rewards. So typically there's a reward at 5, 10, 20, 50, etc. And there's a lot of examples of ideas for rewards. You can go into this discussion. Then you can add a story. So that's a little bit more about, I have to put in these rewards or they won't let me save it. So I'm going to discard the changes. So we go into the story. Here's where you add your video and your project description. So this is the heart of the thing. Risks and challenges. So you basically describe here that, if there's something that you need, if you're seeking government approval and it's possible the government won't give you approval or whatever, you have to mention, what the risks are so people understand what you're doing and so forth. A little bit about you and your team. So like what who you are so people can know that they're dealing with real people. And that's basically it. So it's not that complicated. And then you get a preview. So this is what it's going to look like, right? We haven't put in any images. We haven't put a video, so there's not much to see here. But once you add those in, you'll get a preview. And then this is the link, right? So when you guys are sharing a link, this is where you get the link. Share a preview of your project with your friends. If you click that, now we get a link, right? So if I grab this link and I share it with you, you guys can now see this project. Right? So I just put that link in the chat window. You guys can see that because it's a draft in progress. And that's the link you guys are going to send once you've created your draft. Is that clear to everyone? Does that make sense? Any questions about that? So that's it. The technical part is really easy. It's not the hard part. The hard part is coming up with a good idea, writing out the text, creating the video. And obviously the video here is the same one that you're creating for the assignment, right? There's just one video and use it for this. Okay? Okay, so that's a Kickstarter draft. That's one of the things you're going to do for your assignment. And if you look in the journalism category, one thing I'll show you also here is, well, if you go to the Creator Handbook, you'll see tons of resource material. How do you get started? How do you tell your story effectively? All that kind of stuff. There's a lot of really good guidelines on this. I encourage you to read this. And then if you search, if we go to journalism, you can find all the journalism products, right? Let me actually get out of this page and go to Explore. And now we can go to journalism products. And you can look at all the products, all the journalism projects on Earth. You can look at just the ones in Austria. See if there are any in Austria. Let's see. Yeah, there are 8 projects from Austria right now. Maybe you guys know some of these. I don't know.
Nobody got money.
Yeah, so interesting. Some funding unsuccessful, funding canceled, funding unsuccessful. So maybe one of you will be the first. That's a pretty exciting opportunity. Let's look at from Germany. And again, you can explore these. You can sort them by popularity, by newest, by most funded. So you can explore lots of other examples. And you don't have to look in the journalism category. You can also look in the publishing category or other categories. So here's 59 from Germany. So Beam Magazine was a featured project. Lots of projects. This I would encourage you to explore these as examples and then for inspiration. And here's the link. I think this link will take you to that page. I'm not sure, but I think so. To the page I'm looking at here. And you can see there's quite a number of these. Some unsuccessful, some successful. And yeah, you can filter and search and find other things that are of interest to you. Okay, so let's move on to the Lean Canvas. We're going to talk about Lean Canvas a little bit, a couple other core concepts, and then we're going to talk about the future of journalism and cool new stuff that's emerging. And for the Lean Canvas, I want a couple of volunteers. Alexander, thank you for volunteering. I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
And I'm going to ask for someone else now to volunteer for us to walk through the Lean Canvas. And see if I can quickly show you. Okay, so I'm going to shift my screen sharing to show you something else. Meanwhile, while I'm getting that, any questions? Something you're wondering about? Okay. So I'm going to switch now to the Lean Canvas. We're going to walk through one of your projects, maybe a couple of your projects. And I'm going to switch so we're showing this part of my screen. Okay, do you now see the Lean Canvas? Who'd like to speak up and join me for this exercise? You can save your classmates from being called upon, cold called. Who's going to volunteer?
What do we have to do for volunteering?
Oh, great. I hear someone's voice. Who is that?
It's me, Sarah.
Great. Okay, great. So thanks for volunteering, Sarah. So you see the Lean Canvas on the screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are any of your teammates on here as well? Because it'd be good to have a couple of you if you're on the same team.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So okay. So we're looking at Lean Canvas, and first of all, are there any of these? So there's 9 segments to the Lean Canvas, right? Are there any that are unfamiliar to you or confusing terminology? Something you're kind of like, what is that, or what does that mean? Or do you feel like you have a general sense of all 9 of these segments?
Unfair advantage.
Okay, great. So the unfair advantage is a term. I never like that term unfair because it implies that something is, immoral or, wrong. That's not fair. What it really means is a distinct advantage, something that you have or you can do that other people may not be able to do.
Okay.
So, for example, if you are doing something about, let's say, a podcast about about a podcast about classical music focused on untold stories about the great composers of a history, something like that, right? Which I'm very interested in classical music. I'm very interested in the composers of Vienna, etc. Like that's something that would be a very great interest to me and classical fans around the world, potentially, who are interested in podcasts, but there's not a lot of classical music podcasts. So let's imagine for a moment that you were doing that. You could say, you know what, we have an unfair advantage. We have a distinct advantage because we're located in this city, which has more history around this subject than any other city in the world. So I might be in some other place and be very interested, but I don't have access to these great locations and the Schubert Museum and all of these places where Mahler conducted and so forth. And so that's a unique advantage that you have based on being in Vienna.
And I also don't understand the key matrix.
Sure. Yeah, so key metrics are basically like, how are you going to measure if you're making progress? So, in a hospital, if you think about a hospital situation, doctors have a lot of metrics they can look at, right? They can say, how's the blood pressure doing today? How is the heartbeat doing today? What's the glucose levels? What's the pulse of the patient? And they can look at that hour by hour or day by day or week by week. So they have very specific metrics and they can say, oh, look at this chart, we're doing well. Or, uh-oh, there's some problems. Every day, this has been getting worse. We need to do something different, right? So with any product or service you start, you need those kind of metrics too. And some of them, for very big organizations, they'll look at, Washington Post will look at how many subscribers do we have, right? Or how many unique visitors do we have? But for smaller projects, those kinds of things are not necessarily the main things you want to look at because you have a very small group. So you want to find other things that make sense.
Okay.
So, for example, if you have a podcast and you have a small number of listeners, if you can, you'd like to measure how much time is the average listener, how far is the average listener going in the podcast? So do they average listen to 1 minute, 3 minutes, or all 5 minutes, for example, right? Or on Medium, right, you get metrics. If you publish on Medium, it tells you how many people have completed, what percentage of people have completed your articles. So you can look at the completion rate, and if the completion rate is very low and continues to be low, that might not be a good sign, or it might be a sign that your writing is too long or whatever. So those are examples of metrics. It can also be something like satisfaction rating. It can be a number of opens. If you have a newsletter, what percentage of people you send it to actually open it, or what percentage of people actually click on a link. So those are all metrics. Those are numbers that you can measure and you can chart progress.
Okay.
Any others and then we can walk through. We can just go quadrant by quadrant. Okay, so let's start with the value. Oh, go ahead.
No. Let's just start, and then if I have another question, I will ask later. Great.
And if anyone else wants to jump in to ask a question with your audio or to add to an idea or whatever, please feel free. If you look at the bottom of this, you can see that it suggests an order that you think about this. So you think about the problem, that's one. Then you think about the customer segments, who this problem is faced by. Then you think about the value propositions, what you're actually offering to people. And then you think about the solution. And then you think about how you deliver the solution, the channels, how you get this to people. And then you think about number 6, like what does this cost? And then you think about, how do you make money? And then what does this cost? And then how do you measure it? And then finally, what's distinct about what you have that you can separate yourself from other people who might be doing something similar or offering something to the same to address the same issue. So that's one way you can think about it, and in order you can think about it. Another way to think about it is to start with a clear idea of value proposition and frame that as a problem you're solving. But let's walk through it in the order that they suggest. So let's start with the problem. What's the problem that you envision or that you've identified? A couple of problems.
Okay, we have identified the problem that there are a lot of refugees in Vienna, and in fact they are really confused because they don't know, they have no orientation in the city. They don't know how they can fill in their formulas. They have no newspapers in their language, and maybe they don't have a course where they can learn German.
Great.
So
yeah, go ahead.
That's the problem.
Great. So that's good. And you've identified a couple of different problems as part of that bigger issue, which is great. And by the way, a sub part of this is existing alternatives, right? At the bottom of this, I don't know if you can see that, it says existing alternatives. So what are things that people can do now? So obviously, because the fact that you're stating this as a problem probably means that whatever is existing isn't good enough, right? Or you wouldn't consider a problem. But even if something isn't good enough, they're probably doing something, right? They might be just talking to each other, or they might be reading some website from the country they come from, or what are some of the existing solutions that you think they're using now?
I think maybe they will talk to each other about how they can do things, and I think they try to understand what's going on in the country. Maybe they try to translate the news here to their language. I don't know.
Okay.
Of course, some of them get help from people who work volunteering, or who
so they go to a government agency or a nonprofit or something.
Yes, but there are certainly not enough people who have the time to do this.
Sure. Okay, good. So you're starting to get a picture of what the alternative is, and that helps you identify, okay, what are the weaknesses, right? What are they not doing that we can do better, or what are they doing that we don't have to do? We can do something else. And so now from there, we move to the customer segments, right? And I think in this case, you've already identified that. You're talking about refugees to Vienna. And that big group might have subgroups within it. And, there's a judgment call for each of these, where you might start with one hypothesis, and then you might decide, actually, instead of just refugees in general, maybe let's focus on refugees from these specific countries, or refugees who are older, and of an older age, because they can't access technology and they need more help, or maybe refugees who are children because they're more vulnerable, or because we can reach them in a different way, or maybe refugees who have come here just in the last month or two because they are, particularly in need of this right away, or maybe people who have been here for a while, whatever. Like, you can start to think about different segments within the broader group of refugees. Maybe refugees who have sickness or illness, or maybe refugees who are, I don't know, I'm not sure what the others. You can brainstorm as many possible segments, and then identify, either which one. You can use different criteria. One criteria might be, you have a great idea for helping kids, then that would help you choose, kids. Or you maybe have a great idea for helping older people. Or maybe one of those groups has especially a lot of need. Or maybe one of those groups is especially big. Or maybe one of those groups, you know people in that group, and you can use them as your early customers. So you can choose your customer segments based on, any of those criteria. So let's assume you've chosen, do you want to choose one of those for now, or you can think about that later?
We didn't talk about it so far, but I think maybe our customer segment would be like more younger refugees who maybe also speak English, maybe, or a little bit.
Great. You can change any of this, right?
And people who came more recently to the country, who are really, because I think if you, I don't know if my internet is working. I think if you are for a long time here, probably you already know how to find things, how to do things, how to organize yourself.
Okay, so let's assume for the moment that's what we're working with. So the next thing is the value proposition. So in a very, very short and clear way, and actually, let me see if I can quickly share with you something. Yeah, so I will share with you guys a couple of resources around the value proposition. But essentially, you want to come up with a very simple and concise statement. So for people who need, for example, for refugees in Vienna, for English-speaking recent refugees in Vienna who need to discover opportunities for housing, healthcare, and other services in the city. And do you have a working name?
No, not so far.
Okay. So Vienna Refugee Resource is a blank that provides blank. So is it a newsletter? Is it an app? Is it a website?
It's an app. We would like to do an app.
Okay. So it's an app that provides...
that provides information and that provides orientation in form of, I don't know, I can't find the word. That provides help in everyday life.
Okay, great. So what I just sent to you in the chat is an example of that framing, right? That verbiage for blank who need blank. This name of product is a blank that provides blank, right? So that's a very simple way of summarizing your value proposition. And there's different ways to do that, right? There's different ways of framing it. You can also, in your value proposition, you can also differentiate. You can say, unlike these other resources, this resource, Vienna Refugee Resource, is a blank that does blank, right? And you can have multiple parts to it. It does this, this, and this, right? It's basically a very, very concise summary of what you're doing. So if somebody asks you, you don't have to spend 5 minutes explaining it. You can say, this is what we are. And then chances are they'll say, oh, that's really interesting. How do you do that? Or when are you starting? Or do you need any money? Or, how can I help? Or why did you choose this group? Or, they'll follow up and then you can tell them more about it. But typically the value proposition is a very, very quick and concise way to explain it. And let me see if I can give you these other examples while I'm sharing that one. So next we're going to move on to the solution, right? So this is basically an elaboration of the value prop, right? So you can sort of get into a little bit more detail for how you're going to do this, right? We're creating an app which has 4 different features. Number 1, it does this. Number 2, it does this. Number 3, it does this. And number 4, it does that, right? As an example, right? That's the solution. And of course, having the solution isn't sufficient, right? You need to, if I have an app and it's wonderful and no one's using it, it's worth nothing, right? It has no value. So the thing about having an app is you have to get it into people's hands, right? So that's the 5th thing. That's the next thing, is the channels. So what are 3 or 4 channels of distribution for this?
I think a nice way would, for example, be like to write about it in an article, for example, and like to test it, or let somebody test it. For example, there's a magazine for refugees or people with migration background in Vienna, so this could be an interesting address. And also, I think I don't know if a Facebook page would be, I don't know.
Okay, so we're starting to get to a couple of channels. I think this is the hardest part for any app. I mean, virtually any product or service this is the hardest part, right? Because as we've discussed in the previous sessions, people are full of things that websites they're going to, WhatsApp groups they're part of, email that they get. People have a lot of stuff. So you have to find a way to break into that routine and make them aware of something new. Typically, the best way to do that is to go something that they're already doing. Right? So if they're already in a WhatsApp group with 200 other refugees and you mention in the WhatsApp group there's a new app, they're likely to become aware of it, right? Or if they're already going to a nonprofit for help and that nonprofit has a stack of 100 flyers about the app, or they have or you have someone there who can mention it to people, that's the way to get people into something, is to think about their existing behaviors. If they already have a Facebook group, you go to that Facebook group and you engage with them. If there are influencers in that community who are part of the community and you can convince them that it's useful and you get them to spread the word within the community, that's another method. So you want to think a lot about those methods, and don't assume that people are going to change their behavior, right? Don't assume that suddenly you create something that somehow people are going to start going to your website. They're going to go to whatever website or whatever group or whatever thing they already do. The only way they're going to find your thing is if they hear about it, right, or encounter it within something they're already doing, right? So if you're going to school at FhWien and you're walking into the building every day and somebody stops you and says, here's a postcard, here's a cool new thing, then you might see it, right? Otherwise, you're never going to be aware of that cool new thing that they created somewhere else, right? Next segment is the revenue stream. So what are the ways in which this makes money?
Yes, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, sure, an app, you can sell it, but that's not the point. I mean, we would like to help a group of people who probably...
Right, so their users are not going to be the ones who pay, but that doesn't mean that there's no one who has a stake, right? So who are the stakeholders?
Or maybe, I don't know, maybe it would be possible to cooperate with some institutions in Vienna, for example.
Okay,
they
good.
propose something for the refugees. We propose this in our app, and so we get money from them.
Okay, so you have a very a very strong tradition of social benefits, right, and government support for projects that benefit society, right? We don't have as much of that, at least on a city level here, but you guys do. So that's a good way of getting initial funding in many cases for projects, right? At least to create the project. That's not an ongoing source of revenue typically, but it's a starting point, right? They'll give you a grant to create this if you convince them it's useful. On an ongoing basis, who are the stakeholders, right? So whenever you want to think about revenue, think about who has something to gain, right? In a capitalistic kind of system, people do something if they have something to gain, right? So who has something to gain in terms of these refugees and who might be interested in what you're doing? So obviously, well, go ahead. What do you think?
I think maybe not at this point, but if this whole refugee thing is moving a bit on, then probably people who search workers would be interested.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. There are people who have growing businesses and they need employees. They might have employees who speak a variety of languages, especially if they run international businesses. Travel organizations who sell bus tickets or taxi stuff or travel stuff or plane stuff. Obviously, if people are in a poor condition and are making very little money, they may not have enough money to pay for expensive things. But people who are selling low-cost resources to people, they want to reach a big audience, and it might be in their interest to have people aware of their products and services. There are tons and tons of companies that make a ton of money across India and Africa, selling to low-income people across those different parts of the world. It's called the bottom of the pyramid. And there's a book called The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, which is about how companies can make money by providing useful services to low-income people. So another group is the nonprofits themselves, right? Their goal, some of the nonprofits, their goal is to provide services, right? So they have an interest in reaching people so that people know about those services. So if they can reach people through your app, typically they have a marketing budget, and they can allocate some of their marketing budget to reach people through your app if you're solving that problem for them. So right there's a few examples of stakeholders, and those are ways that you can generate initial funding and also ongoing revenue potentially. And when you're thinking about the product and service and the project, you know the market much better than I do, and you know who these actual organizations are, or if you don't know, you can find that out relatively easily. So that should be part of your submission. You should say, these are 3 organizations in Vienna that are doing this. This is what their goal is, and they would be potential partners for this. So don't just say, we think might be some nonprofit somewhere, because it just takes 5 or 10 minutes of legwork to figure out what are those nonprofits and mention them specifically, because that's a lot more polished and professional when you're producing something. And that's true for all of you. You should be as specific as possible. And it often doesn't take that much time. We have the magic of the internet. You can find out the stakeholders in a matter of minutes, who they are, what organizations they are, and you can even find out who their partners are, and etc. And if you really want to, you can even send them an email and say, we're thinking about doing this, and what do you can even reach out to them, which is great. Okay, so now we're near the end. Cost structure. What are the key costs?
Yeah, probably we have to engage somebody who creates an app for us.
Okay, so the
because we are not web developers, so this will be a bit of expensive and also probably somebody who translates some of the texts we have.
Okay, so translation costs, technical development.
Yeah, because it would be nice if we have some texts in Arabic language, but I don't think we can do this with everything. So
okay. So obviously you do something in phases as well. So you do an initial phase, then you do a secondary phase and a tertiary phase. The first phase might not even be an app itself. You might create a little pamphlet. We just created one here as an example about our program. It's like 20 pages. It's just a PDF, and we just had it printed. And we can test out what questions, what pages people look at, what they like, what information is useful. So you could create a simple paper pamphlet and go to 10 different people and just give it to them and see what they say and see what they look at and see what questions they ask. Because before you build an app and spend tens of thousands of dollars, right, you want to make sure you know what's useful to people and what they need, and you can do that with some paper first. So I'd encourage you to start with paper prototyping. You can even use index cards, right? If you don't want to print something up in a fancy way, you can just create a little stack of index cards and staple them together, right? It's about the utility. It's not about the beauty in the initial phase, right? And the cost, I think you're exactly right. The other cost that's going to be something to consider is marketing. So if you want to advertise in some publications, or if you want to have someone handing flyers out or something, right, there's a little bit of cost. Or if you want to advertise with targeted Facebook ads or Twitter ads that target people who speak Arabic, et cetera, you can do those targeting. And it could just be a small amount at first. You might just spend $10 on a targeted Facebook ad. But the point is that that's going to be a cost, right? It's going to be time, but also a little bit of expense potentially. And then the last thing, just because of time, I'm just going to move through these and then move on to the last point. The key metrics. So you can think about process metrics and results metrics. So process metrics means what you do that you control. So for example, I'm going to speak to 10 people this month, 10 interviews with refugees. That's a process metric, right? That doesn't mean that I'm going to have 30 people signed up for my newsletter, because I might not be able to get them to sign up. If it's up to them to decide if they sign up. But a process metric is how many conversations you're going to have, or how many emails you're going to send to potential partners, or I'm going to produce 5 pages of sample content on index cards, or whatever it is. The results metric is how people respond. So I hope to, I'm going to track what number of pages people look at. For example, if you give them an index card and you ask them, to put an X on the pages that are useful, that they want to read more about, and you want to get that, and you consider that a success. If you have 10 cards, you hope that at least 30% of it is useful, or at least 50% of it is useful. And you can track, you can go back next week and see if you improve it, if it's a little bit more useful. So those are metrics that you can track over time to see if it's getting more useful as you develop the product. Eventually, if you have an app, you can track the number of downloads, obviously, right? And not just downloads, but how many people open the app and use the app.
Yeah.
And also track how much action is taken. For example, if you ask people to sign up for your newsletter, how many signups are there, et cetera. And then finally, the last thing that unfair advantage, you presumably in your team, you have some knowledge about this problem, you have some passion about this problem, or you care about it. Maybe you know some people who are working for these organizations, or maybe you have other information.
One of our team is working for a refugee organization, so he has the knowledge.
Good, perfect. So we've walked through the 9 elements of the canvas, and essentially you'd articulate each of those things, and you'd do a rough draft, and then you improve upon it, you refine it a little bit, and then you take each page of the PDF and you elaborate a little bit on each of those points, and use graphics or statistics or quotes, images, anything that helps you make the persuasive case for that. Okay? Any questions? Nice. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes perfectly sense.
Great. Any questions about that, or anyone else have a question about what we just did, or how you would do this for yourself, or anything that you do? You should feel free. If you have a draft and you want to send me something along the way, and during December you want to send me an email and say, hey, this is our draft of our canvas, and we really want to do well at this. Can you look at this and give us suggestions? I'm happy to do that. If you're ahead of the game and working on it and you want input, I'm happy to give it to you. In terms of the we're running out of time. I'm glad we did that because I think that's applicable to your assignment, which is coming up in the next month. And by the time we talk next, in mid-December, it's already close to the final deadline. So maybe we'll save most of the future stuff we'll save the future stuff for that session, because that'll be close to the deadline. That's a shorter session as well, as you know from the schedule. That'll be the last live webinar. I'll add some additional material to the course path, including these Kickstarter documents and a couple of more documents about the value proposition that we just talked about. Questions? Let me pause and give you a moment for questions in the chat before we get ready to close this session. Okay, so I'm going to pose another question then for you through Socrative. So that's basically that quick replies link. So I'm going to ask you to go to that in a second. Let me close out this existing one so I can open up another one. Okay, so I'm going to ask you basically, so you can think about it while I'm preparing this. I want to ask you to basically to think about something you took away from the session, something you understand better than you did before we started, and also something that may be still puzzling you about, or that you'd like to learn more about, and that will be helpful to me and help you think about something that you've hopefully are more aware of now, and then something that you are still puzzled about or you'd like to hear more about. Okay, so I'm going to now launch this new one. Let me just close up the old one. Okay. Okay, so now this new one is okay. So you can see that now. You should see it now. I'm going to launch it right now. Okay, so you should see this right now. It's just 3 questions. So you should see that right now, and this will be our concluding activity for today. So you should see it if you go to bit.ly/quick replies. You should see these 3 questions. The first is, one thing I better understand now is, if you have more than one, you can put actually more than one in here, but just put one in here at least. And one thing I'm still puzzled about. And then lastly, the third question is just one thing I'd like us to spend a little more time on, and that's in the last session, so I can plan ahead for that. Or maybe I can add materials to your course path about, or mention on Facebook. Okay, so I see a bunch of you answering. I'd like to see all of the people who are in this session answering. So please, if you haven't, I can see all the participants, and I can see those who have added material and those who haven't. So if you haven't, I guess I'll assume you've fallen asleep or are otherwise engaged in something else. So please, those of you who haven't answered this, again, it's bit.ly/quick replies.
Sorry, I don't see anything.
Okay, you may need to reload your screen. Just refresh or go to the link again.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you're spelling it the same way. Now, do you see that? Okay. So a few people still have not chimed in there, so I'm not sure if that's a technical issue or, again, a sleep issue or whatever else. But you are still in the room, so you're still in the Zoom room. Okay, so I'm going to share with you a presentation, which I wanted to walk through, but we didn't have time. I'm sharing the link to the speaker deck. This is a colleague of mine who created this. We created this presentation for a class, for one of my classes. His name is Josh Stearns, and it's about new revenue streams for news. Actually, if you go to the overall bit.ly/EJ links, there's a section about revenue streams, because a couple of you asked about revenue. And there's a couple of those links that walk you through different types of revenue streams. And maybe we'll come back and talk more about that again in the last session. Who is missing? Somebody asked who is missing. Most of you are in the room and have answered the question, but a few people haven't. Okay, now there's just a couple people missing. I don't want to embarrass anyone and call them out, so I won't mention specific names. This is helpful for me. I'll review this information about what you'd like to spend more time on and what's still puzzling you. I don't want to keep you late. I know it's already late in the evening for you guys. So I appreciate, again, as I've mentioned before, I know you guys have very busy schedules, busy lives, lots of work, and I appreciate that you took the time out to focus on this and to participate in this. I hope it's interesting and valuable to you. I hope the course in general is valuable to you and interesting to you. I hope that this process is interesting and challenging and fun and rewarding for you as you develop a product. I guarantee you throughout your careers, you will have occasion to work on new projects of various kinds. And in my experience, a lot of people find that having done this ends up being useful in ways that they don't necessarily even appreciate fully at first. So I think you'll find it in the long run to be something you're glad you did, particularly if you do it well and you put some time and effort into it. Again, if you have questions or you want to run something by me, feel free to email me. If you can, be as clear as possible with your question so that I can use my time efficiently and be helpful to you. So if you send me something, don't just send me something blindly. Send me something with a specific question or something that I can be helpful with. That way it'll be more efficient and useful for you and for me. Yeah, somebody mentioned, just mentioned something, somebody mentioned about Kickstarter in Austria. I think that it's a good point that America is one of the leading markets for Kickstarter. And so what I would say about that is, the point of this exercise isn't so much the Kickstarter part per se, it's the idea of being able to frame your project and your product in a very kind of clear, user-focused way. And we're using Kickstarter as a lens through which to do that, but it's not so much about the platform specifically. It's more really about the idea of focusing your attention on what users actually need and how you can explain and clarify a product for other people or project. So whether or not it's in the end, it's for Kickstarter or for some other platform, ultimately that's a secondary issue, although I think it's an interesting question, and I think you're right that it may be different in different countries. I would say that what often happens is individual projects just take off in certain places in some cases, if you have a community that is interested, and so projects can be successful all over the world, depending on what they're doing, regardless of the size of the country. Okay, so let's wrap there. I want to look and see if there are any final questions before I turn this all off. You couldn't save your answer after refreshing the page. Okay. Well, I think I have your answers in here. It looks like I have answers from you in here. So it looks like there's only one person whose answer I don't seem to have, and that's okay. I wish you a great weekend. Looks like there's no other questions. If it says still loading, it means if you've submitted it, it probably did work. So that's probably fine. So, and if not, then if you'd like, you can email me separately. That's totally fine too. Any other questions? Feel free to put them in. Otherwise, actually we have something similar to Kickstarter, but just for your country, so people don't really use it. Pretty much the same thing. Yeah, there's a lot of platforms like that around the world. There's a bunch of different crowdfunding platforms. Kickstarter is a great one because has the highest number of users, and has proven effective for thousands and thousands of people. And actually, Kickstarter just launched a new thing called Drip, which is a subscription kind of service, which is a little bit like Patreon, where people can subscribe to your service and on a monthly basis basically give you monthly payments, which is a brand new thing, literally this week, like a couple of days ago, 2 days ago. So that's something else that could be interesting to people to look at, which is a little bit of a new model for Kickstarter. It's an addition to the existing model. And it's one of the few platforms that's really global. So you often have people outside of a given country supporting a product if they're interested in that issue. Okay, great. So thanks everyone. Have a great weekend. And you have my email address if you want to reach out to me for any reason, jeremy@jeremykaplan.com. We have Thanksgiving. I don't know if do you guys celebrate Thanksgiving? I don't even know if you do. No, right? So anyway, we're celebrating Thanksgiving, and I'm thankful that I get to work with you guys. It's a great group. I enjoy your program, and I hope this is useful to you. Have a great weekend.
Happy Thanksgiving. Bye.
Bye. You can have turkey anyways, even if it's not Thanksgiving.